The dog who was trying to set up its owner. 1. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and damp fur, the sharp chemical sting of bleach clinging to the back of Lila. Bennett's throat, while underneath it lingered the heavier scent of animals who had waited too long for someone to notice them. She stood just inside the doorway with her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her canvas tote, as though the small weight of it might steady her if she decided to turn around and walk back out into the afternoon sun. The corridor stretched ahead in a long echoing line of metal gates and concrete floors, each kennel holding a pair of anxious eyes and a body that pressed forward at the faintest suggestion of attention. Barking ricocheted off tile and steel, bouncing in sharp, overlapping bursts that made the space feel smaller than it was. "You can take your time," the volunteer said, her voice gentle but practiced, as though she had repeated those words countless times before. Her name tag read Marcy, and her soft face and escaping wisps of gray-streaked hair suggested patience honed by years of standing in this very spot. Lila nodded without speaking. She had not meant to come inside today. She had only intended to walk past the shelter on her way home from work, as she always did, head down, thoughts preoccupied with spreadsheets and unanswered emails. The building sat on the corner between her apartment and the bus stop, its windows painted with cartoon paw prints and bright slogans that felt almost painfully optimistic. Usually she avoided looking at them. Today she had slowed, then paused, then reached for the door handle before she had quite decided why. Now she moved down the corridor slowly, the sound of her shoes scuffing against concrete nearly swallowed by the barking. A golden retriever leapt against the bars with an eager yelp, tail thrashing wildly. A small terrier spun in frantic circles, nails skittering on the floor. A shepherd mix howled long and low, a sound that trembled through her ribs. Then she saw him. He was not at the front of his kennel. He did not bark or leap or scratch. Instead, he sat at the back wall, still as a shadow, watching everything with a quiet intensity that seemed at odds with the chaos around him. His coat was black and white, sharply divided as though someone had spilled ink across snow and allowed it to dry in clean edges. One eye was blue, startlingly pale, and the other a deep warm brown. His ears were large and alert, and his head tilted slightly when he noticed her looking at him. Lila felt something tighten beneath her ribs, a small inward pull she could not immediately name. She took a step closer, then another, until she stood directly in front of his kennel. He rose in a single fluid motion and walked toward the gate without hurry, without the frantic desperation she had seen in the others. He stopped just before the bars and regarded her carefully, as if weighing her. "He's been here a while," Marcy said quietly from behind her. "Border collie mix. Very smart. Too smart sometimes. He figures things out." The dog pressed his nose gently against the bars. Lila crouched down, the cold of the concrete seeping through her slacks, and extended her hand cautiously. He did not lick or paw at her. He simply leaned forward and allowed her fingers to brush his fur, then pressed his weight deliberately into her palm as though to test whether she would pull away. She did not. His fur was cooler than she expected, smooth beneath her touch. He watched her face while she stroked the side of his neck, and when she whispered, "Hi," the word felt fragile in the space between them. His tail gave a slow, measured sweep against the floor. Marcy unlocked the kennel door and stepped back. "His name's Atlas." Atlas stepped out into the corridor and circled Lila once, his movement unhurried, assessing. He paused in front of her and lifted one paw, holding it suspended in a polite offering. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, surprising her with its brightness. She had not heard herself laugh like that in months. She took his paw automatically, shaking it with exaggerated solemnity. "You're very polite," she murmured. Atlas held her gaze, ears forward, as though pleased with her response. An hour later she signed the paperwork with a hand that trembled slightly, though whether from nerves or something else she could not quite determine. When she led Atlas out of the shelter and into the sunlight, he walked at her side with calm certainty, neither pulling ahead nor lagging behind, and when she glanced down at him he glanced back up, as if to confirm that this arrangement suited him. That evening, Atlas explored her apartment with the measured thoroughness of someone conducting an inspection. He sniffed the kitchen cabinets, nudged the couch, examined the hallway, and paused at the closed door of her bedroom before pushing it open with his nose and trotting inside without hesitation. "Excuse me," Lila said, following him with a faint huff of amusement. He leapt onto the bed in a single graceful motion and turned twice before settling squarely in the center, occupying the space as though it had always belonged to him. She stood at the foot of the bed and stared. He blinked at her, slow and unbothered. "You're not subtle," she informed him. He lowered his chin onto the blanket and watched her expectantly. She sank down beside him, exhaustion creeping through her limbs now that the day's momentum had slowed. The apartment, which had felt cavernous and too quiet for months, seemed smaller tonight. The ticking clock no longer echoed as sharply. The refrigerator's hum blended into the background instead of dominating it. Atlas shifted closer until his side pressed firmly against her hip, his warmth steady and grounding. She swallowed and stared at the ceiling. "Well," she murmured into her pillow, "I guess it's just us." His tail thumped once against the mattress, a soft punctuation. 2 days later, Atlas refused to walk their usual route. Lila tugged lightly on the leash when he paused at the corner. "We go left," she said, attempting firmness she did not entirely feel. Atlas planted his paws and turned his head deliberately to the right. "Atlas." He looked at her, one blue eye glinting in the afternoon light, then pivoted and began walking the opposite direction. She exhaled slowly and followed. They walked 3 blocks farther than she typically ventured during her evening stroll, and Atlas's pace grew more confident as they approached a small corner cafe she had noticed before but never entered. Its windows were framed with hanging plants, and a chalkboard sign outside read in looping white letters, "Fresh pastries and terrible puns." Atlas pulled her directly toward the door. "Oh no," she muttered, glancing around at the small cluster of people seated at outdoor tables. "You are not dragging me into a cafe." He barked once, sharp and expectant. A woman at a nearby table turned to look at them, eyebrows raised. Heat crept into Lila's cheeks. "Fine," she sighed, and pushed open the door. Warm air wrapped around her instantly, carrying the rich scent of espresso and sugar. The cafe's interior was bathed in late afternoon sunlight that streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes midair and turning them into floating flecks of gold. Wooden tables and mismatched chairs filled the space, and potted plants trailed lazily from shelves along the walls. Atlas trotted inside as though returning to a familiar haunt. A man standing at the counter turned at the sound of the door. He was tall, dark-haired, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms lightly dusted with flour. He held a ceramic mug halfway to his lips and paused when he saw the dog approaching with direct focus. Atlas froze for a split second, then advanced. "Oh no," Lila breathed. In one swift movement, Atlas reached the counter and gently but decisively plucked a leather glove from its edge with his teeth. "Hey," the man exclaimed, startled. Atlas darted back toward Lila, tail wagging vigorously, the glove dangling from his mouth like a trophy. "Atlas." Lila lunged forward, mortification flooding her as she grabbed his collar. "I am so sorry. He's new. He's never." Atlas dropped the glove neatly at the man's feet and sat upright, ears perked, as though presenting an offering for inspection. The man stared at the glove, then at the dog, and then laughed, a warm, unrestrained sound that filled the cafe. "Well," he said, crouching to retrieve it, "that's one way to introduce yourself." Up close, his eyes were a deep hazel flecked with green, and a faint dimple appeared in his left cheek when he smiled. Lila felt her composure slip slightly under the weight of his gaze. "I promise he's not usually a thief," she said quickly, though she had known Atlas for less than 3 days and could not vouch for his character with certainty. Atlas leaned against the man's knee, pressing his flank there with confident familiarity. The man raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" We've never been here before," she insisted. "That's suspicious," he replied gravely, and then extended his hand toward her. "I'm Ethan." "Lila." Atlas wagged harder, as if approving the exchange. Ethan glanced down at the dog. "And you, Atlas?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "Of course you are." Lila laughed, and this time she did not feel startled by it. Atlas lay down between them as if satisfied that the necessary introductions had been completed. 3. From that day forward, Atlas established a pattern that neither of them could ignore. Each morning and evening he guided Lila to the cafe with unwavering determination, ignoring alternative routes and planting his paws stubbornly whenever she attempted resistance. Inside, he sought Ethan out with singular focus, occasionally slipping behind the counter if the opportunity presented itself and retrieving small items from Ethan's apron pocket, pens, folded receipts, once even a spoon, which he would then deposit at Lila's feet with ceremonious pride. Ethan seemed less bothered than amused. "He's very selective," he observed one afternoon when Atlas delivered a paper napkin into Lila's lap as though bearing a coded message. "He doesn't steal from anyone else." Lila narrowed her eyes at the dog, who regarded her with innocent composure. "You're not subtle," she told him. Atlas thumped his tail. Ethan's laughter came easily around them, threading through the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the clink of cups. Gradually, conversation filled the spaces Atlas engineered. At first it was small and safe, work schedules, favorite books, the unpredictable weather, but as days accumulated, the topics deepened without either of them acknowledging the shift. Lila noticed the way Ethan tapped his fingers absently against the counter while thinking, and how he hummed under his breath while steaming milk, a barely audible melody that rose and fell in contented rhythms. She noticed the crease between his brows when concentrating and the careful precision with which he arranged pastries in the display case. Ethan noticed how Lila tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when flustered, and how she bit the inside of her cheek when choosing her words, and how her shoulders seemed to relax gradually each time she stepped through the cafe door. Atlas watched everything. One rainy afternoon, when the cafe was nearly empty and the world outside had blurred into streaks of silver, Atlas nudged Ethan's ankle and then Lila's, shifting their chairs closer together with his nose until their knees brushed beneath the table. The contact sent a sharp spark up Lila's leg. She jerked slightly before forcing herself still. Ethan did not move away. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. The cafe glowed warm around them. Atlas rested his chin on his paws and regarded them with solemn approval. By the third week, neither of them could pretend the pattern was accidental. "This is deliberate," Ethan said one morning, watching as Atlas dropped yet another small item, a folded order slip, into Lila's lap. Lila crouched in front of the dog, squinting suspiciously. "Are you matchmaking?" Atlas tilted his head. Ethan crossed his arms. "He drags you here every day. He steals exclusively from me." "You could bark once for yes," Lila challenged lightly. Atlas barked once. They froze. Lila blinked slowly. "Coincidence." Atlas barked again. Ethan doubled over with laughter, gripping the counter for balance while Lila pressed her lips together in a losing battle against her own smile. 4. The real shift came on a quiet Sunday when the cafe was officially closed. Atlas dragged Lila there anyway, his insistence so intense she found herself half laughing, half protesting as she followed him around to the side entrance. "See," she said, gesturing toward the darkened windows. "Closed." Atlas ignored her and nosed at the slightly ajar back door. "Ethan," Lila called cautiously. From inside came the sound of movement, and a moment later Ethan appeared from the kitchen, flour streaked lightly across his hands. "Lila, everything okay?" Before either of them could react, Atlas slipped between them and nudged the door shut with decisive force. It slammed closed. Click. They both turned slowly toward the handle. "Did he just?" Ethan began. "Yes." He tried the knob. It did not budge. From the other side came the faint scrape of paws, then silence. Lila pressed her hand against her mouth, laughter bubbling up despite herself. "He's escalating." Ethan leaned back against the counter, shaking his head with disbelief. "Your dog is terrifying." Silence settled, but it was not strained. The kitchen smelled faintly of sugar and warm dough. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the roof, the sound rhythmic and intimate. Lila became acutely aware of how close they stood. Ethan's flour-dusted fingers rested near her hand on the counter, the space between them narrowing until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Her heartbeat rose, each thud echoing in her ears. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't actually mind," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "Being locked in, being dragged into your mornings." The words hung between them, heavy and fragile. Her fingers curled slightly against the countertop. She felt heat rising along her skin, a mix of anticipation and something more vulnerable that made her breath shallow. Ethan stepped closer, slowly enough that she could retreat if she wished. She did not. He lifted his hand and brushed his fingertips lightly along her cheek, tentative, searching. Her breath caught. The world narrowed to the warmth of his palm and the faint scent of flour and coffee clinging to him. He leaned in gradually, giving her every opportunity to turn away. She didn't. Their lips met softly, almost uncertain at first, the contact warm and gentle. Lila's hands rose instinctively to grasp the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself in the solid reality of him. The kiss deepened slightly, breath mingling, her pulse racing until she could feel it in her fingertips. Outside the door, a single triumphant bark rang out. They broke apart with quiet laughter, foreheads brushing. "Your dog is a menace," Ethan murmured, his voice low. "My dog," she corrected, unable to suppress her smile. When they finally opened the door, Atlas strutted inside with an air of accomplishment, glancing up at them with bright, satisfied eyes. Ethan crouched to scratch behind his ears. "You're impossible." Atlas licked his hand once. Lila watched them both, warmth spreading through her chest, steady and sure. The apartment would not feel as hollow tonight. The silence would not press so heavily against the walls. Atlas circled them once and lay down between them, chin resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded in contentment. If he had a plan, it appeared to be unfolding exactly as intended. End.